Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I'm Libby Gruner, and I teach here in the English department, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon. It is my duty, but also my pleasure, to thank all those who've made this event possible today. When I first realized that we might be able to put this reading together, I checked in with my chair, Suzanne Jones, and she told me it was a busy week, there was a lot going on, our funding was running out, and then she offered the English department support, which is really nice. So my thanks to the English department. It's always good to have the support of your chair. But it's not enough. Events like this require the cooperation of many, and I was pleased also to secure support for the event from 3 other programs on campus. First, Common Ground, the University of Richmond's diversity initiative. This spring, Common Ground sponsored a series of lunch panel discussions on women in the tenure process, and those conversations were so lively and fruitful that it seemed only natural to tag along after them with this event, also focused on women's position in the academy, both within and outside the tenure stream. So thank you to Lisa Miles and Glenn Hughes of Common Ground. It's also long been my pleasure to be affiliated with the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program on campus, and I'm delighted to have their support as well. My thanks to Jane Geeney, the WGSS coordinator. And finally, we have the support of the WIL program, the Women Involved in Living and Learning program, a co-curricular 4-year program for women that combines an academic minor in WGSS with opportunities outside of the classroom for students who want to and do actively participate in improving the world around them. So thanks also to Holly Blake and Melissa Uden of the WIL program. And thanks also to the bookstore, the telecom office, the catering office. There's just so much support for this program. It's great. And I hope you'll stay for the reception. I trust that there now are things under those blue drapes. There weren't when I came in. Maybe there will be. As the list of our sponsors should demonstrate, this is a community effort, and I think that's fitting for a book that really feels like a communal project. Maybe not actually to Caroline, who did a lot of the work on it, but to those of us who are in it. We have here this afternoon only 4 of the, by my count, 40. Is that right? So we have 10% of the contributors to the volume. But I think we've all, over the last year since the book came out, come to realize through it that we're part of a much larger community of women and men, academic and not, who are all living these issues. So I want also to thank and to introduce my 3 fellow readers here today as representatives of that larger community. And I'll just say a quick word about format. There will be a brief introduction. We're in the middle of that now. Then each of us will read for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end of that, and I hope that we'll have some nice discussion and then adjourn. There are also books in the back that you can purchase, and I believe some of the contributors might be willing to sign your copy if you're interested in that. So our first reader will be Della Fenster. Recently promoted to Professor of Mathematics here at the University of Richmond, Della researches the history of mathematics, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She teaches across the mathematics curriculum, as well as teaching in the core course, a travel course to Vienna, and a living and learning course that examines the critical questions of life through art and literature. She's also the mother of 3 children who are on spring break this week, and so as some of you know, that involves a little bit of extra coordination. I'll be your second reader. You already know who I am, and I have 2 children, one of whom is in the audience. And our third reader is Jennifer Cognard-Black, a professor of English and coordinator of women, gender, and sexuality at St. Mary's College of Maryland. Author of a textbook, a book of criticism, and an anthology of women's letters, Jennifer also publishes short stories, teaches a food writing course, and loves nothing better than to spin memory threads with her 9-year-old Kate, also here today. Finally, Caroline Grant, the co-editor of Mama Ph.D., and I should probably say my sister because people tend to wonder, like, do you really look that much like? Yeah. Caroline will also read from her essay. Caroline holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of California at Berkeley. She serves as editor-in-chief for Literary Mama, where she also writes a monthly column, Mama at the Movies. Her children, her 2 boys, are in town, but not quite over their jet lag, so they're playing rather than sitting in here listening to Mama tell stories. Before Della reads, Caroline will give us a little more context for our reading, so I will now turn the podium over to her.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you all for coming. I was here over a year ago. Della Fenster invited my co-editor, Elrena and Evans, and me to speak at a lunch gathering of faculty and staff, but mainly students. And afterwards, Elrena and I were talking about how impressed we were that undergraduates would come to this conversation about issues facing parents in higher education, that they would take some time to think about these issues that were 5, 10, 15 years in the future for them. And it made us really confident in the possibility for change, that younger people were thinking about these issues. In that time, in the year that's passed since that lunch, there have been some good changes for all of us. Obama was elected and very quickly signed into law the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Wage Act. And this book was published, so a minor part of that good change. And I wouldn't be here, and this book wouldn't be here really, without Libby, who gave me the most clear-eyed perspective on a life in higher education, and a perspective that helped me go into higher ed, and then ultimately a perspective that helped me leave. So I'm going to read, which is a good thing, So I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction, give you some context for this. And I have to dedicate this little bit to my co-editor, Elrena, who has a 3-week-old, so is probably home nursing right as I speak. It all started with nurses. Elrena was sitting at her computer, nursing her baby girl and Googling the new vocabulary of her life. If you try this, Google will ask if you really mean nurseries, but if you're sure of your spelling, you'll still find a link to the essay Elrena found that day, Amy Hudock's column for Literary Mama, First Day of School. Elrena read the piece and cried, and after several weeks of reading Literary Mama, writing, weeping, and nursing, often simultaneously, she was ready to submit an essay of her own. I was a former academic and an editor for Literary Mama, still figuring out how to replace the Academy's comfortably rigid structure of classes and meetings with a messy mix of playgroups and nap times, writing, and editing, when Elrena's essay arrived in my inbox. That is how we met, as words on a screen, messages emailed back and forth. The Academy would have approved of our purely textual interaction. In this no man's land of black lines on white screens, we communicated, temporarily free of the physical demands of our offline lives. But that freedom changed. Elrena was a PhD student and brand new mother, trying to find her way through this new phase of her life, trying to balance a tiny baby and a big degree. I lived across the country with a toddler and another baby on the way. Our nursing, pregnant, childbearing bodies were often at the forefront of our thoughts, and soon we began to discuss our lives as more than just text. We began to discuss our lives as mothers. Elrena's essay went through pleasant months of gradual revisions, my baby's birth, her move to a new home, and numerous other claims on our time, our attention, and our bodies slowed us down. When the essay was finally published, I wrote Elrena a congratulatory email. I hope your new year is getting off to a fine start. I kept thinking of you, well, your daughter really, when Eli started solid food, as there were many spoon and eye incidents. He's getting better at the whole eating thing now. Funny to think he was still an inside baby when we first started corresponding about your essay. In her response, Elrena mentioned that for the first time outside the context of birthing, mentioned the idea of writing about her graduate work. What I'd really like to do is a series of essays focused around the dissertation process and what it's like to go through a dissertation as the mother of a toddler. I know the university has made leaps and bounds in terms of being more friendly toward women, but walking the halls with a baby makes me feel like a poser at best. I had finished graduate work before starting my family, and I wrote back with enthusiasm. There was an anthology several years ago called On the Market, I think. In fact, Libby has an essay in that collection that offered people's personal reflections on the MLA job market experience. One more specifically focused on mothers dealing with academia would be really interesting, and maybe, but I'm too optimistic, provoke some changes. See, I kind of leapt on her idea and said, let's do it. And so what began as an email conversation about one essay gradually grew into a larger discussion of mothering in the academy, a discussion in which we quickly found we wanted more women to participate. So now I'm going to turn the podium over to some more of those women. Here's Della.
Okay, so thanks to Libby for putting this together. I just showed up, which I rarely do on this campus. It was a pleasure. And I'm also going to thank my own student, Jamie, who read the excerpt that I prepared for today and excerpted the excerpt for you all today. This is called Infinite Calculations. The airmail letter arrived 5 months after the birth of my third child. I had just begun a year-long leave of absence, ostensibly to adjust to motherhood as a family of 5. I hoped to keep my research moving along by writing one short article that year, but that was the full extent of my professional plans. The letter with the Oberwolfach, Germany postmark changed all of that for me. Upon the recommendation of the organizers, the letter from the director of the Institute began, I'm pleased to invite you to participate in a number theory conference at Oberwolfach. Designed to facilitate the crucial exchange of ideas between mathematicians, the Math Institute in Germany invites leading representatives of significant research areas from across the globe to meet for an intense week of discussion and interaction. I read the words once, then twice, to make sure I actually held an invitation to this Math Institute I had only dreamed of visiting one day. But it had arrived at the most inopportune time in my career. I had a baby who depended primarily on my body for his physical sustenance, just as surely as I had a tenure case on the horizon that would benefit from a talk given at an Oberwolfach conference. I had always claimed I would find a balance between my professional and personal lives, but what did balance mean when the predictable world of mathematics met the unpredictable world of children? Since the birth of my first child, I had been redefining balance constantly, depending on circumstances at home and at school. Over time, that balance seemed to hinge on sleepless nights more than anything else. What did balance mean now with 3 children, an upcoming tenure decision, and the professional opportunity of a lifetime? That confluence of events deserves some thought. I started negotiating with myself that same day. I had 10 months to prepare a talk. I could manage that. Casey, the baby, would have blown out his first birthday candle a few months before the conference convened. I could leave him for a week. I could even leave him for a week guiltlessly. I accepted the invitation. In the 279 days between the arrival of the invitation and the conference itself, I tended to an infant, his 3-year-old brother, and his first grader sister. I invested the waning hours of the night in my research. Ironically, the early 20th century mathematician I studied produced his best mathematics from 8:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. Never mind, he had a wife to awaken the kids and get them off to school, or that he typically arrived at his office at 10 a.m. He and I had the night in common. I finished my talk a week before I left. Side note, that has not happened before or since. On the airplane, no. That left me with only one thing to do before my departure, cry. So I did. I cried when I changed the baby's diaper. I cried when I read to my 3-year-old. I cried when I circled around the carpool loop. I cried when my husband carried my suitcase to the car and my 3 kids clung to my neck. And then I drove away. I read a novel on the airplane. I watched a movie, not Thomas the Tank or Thumbelina. No, I watched Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts in Notting Hill. In fact, I watched it twice. When the flight attendant inquired chicken or pasta, I felt sure I had a tiara on my head. Any lingering traces of guilt left me as the train rumbled along from the airport in Frankfurt, Germany, to the tiny town of Wolfach. I had forgotten what it was like to travel with a book bag and without a diaper bag. I ordered hot tea from the food cart and didn't worry about it spilling on anyone. I put in lots of sugar, since no one was looking. For reasons I cannot explain, many of the best math institutes in the world are located in stunningly beautiful areas, and Oberwolfach is no exception. Situated halfway up a small mountain, the institute offered an unparalleled opportunity for stillness and reflection, particularly for a mother of 3. With its Spartan decor of a bed, a desk, and a bedside table, my room overlooked the lush green valley below. As a first-time visitor to the institute, I was given a tour of the dining room, the wine closet, and the chocolate cabinet. Mathematicians understand the quintessential aspects of life. The institute served 3 gourmet meals a day, along with tea at 4 and evening snacks at 10. It had been at least 7 years since I enjoyed this kind of quiet luxury. Even so, the first 24 hours of the conference, I felt anxious and uneasy. What was I doing here with all these experts? Why had I left my children halfway around the world to spend a week discussing mathematics? On Monday night, in one of the common areas specifically designed for conversation, I shared a bottle of wine with the conference organizers. On Tuesday, after my talk on how a historical study of number theory led to a proof of a significant result in mathematics, I began to feel more a part of the group. By Wednesday, I felt comfortable enough to ask questions, and by Thursday, I offered my insights without reservation. On Saturday, I boarded the train back to Frankfurt with a tiny twinge of regret. The focused week of discussions had not only introduced me to an entirely new community of scholars and their ideas, but it had bolstered my confidence. I could hold my own on an international stage. I could even hold my own as a scholar with 3 children. By tenure time, 2 years later, the Oberwolfach experience had led to invitations in Pisa and Vienna. I felt confident that my portfolio contained convincing evidence of what the university calls an international reputation. While my colleagues at the University of Richmond debated my tenure decision, I began pursuing the possibility of a sabbatical in Vienna that ultimately became a reality. When the ball dropped in Times Square in 2005, we had 3 seasons of clothes for 5 people tucked into 7 suitcases and scholarly materials stashed into 2. At the airport, my 4-year-old's hands activated the sensor under the faucet in the bathroom. "It's a miracle," he celebrated. If he only knew. Shortly before dinner on New Year's Day, the 5 of us boarded an Airbus bound for Vienna. We began to establish a rhythm in our lives. On weekday mornings, our big kids, Hannah 11 and Colin 8, traveled to bilingual schools via subway and trains on their own. They discovered they liked independent living. I walked hand in hand with our 4-year-old Casey to a small school around the corner from our apartment. I continued on toward the Erwin Schrödinger International Institute for Mathematical Physics by way of Boltzmanngasse, a small street named after the Austrian physicist. I climbed 70 stairs to the 3rd floor of a 16th century abbey, which gave way to the Schrödinger Institute. If I arrived early, I punched in the secret code, a certain prime number less than 10,000. My office, it's true, my office overlooked the rooftops of the 9th District of Vienna and served as an impossibly perfect conduit for afternoon sun. The full-length chalkboards in the bathrooms reflected the overall emphasis on capturing original thoughts. It's also true. The Schrödinger Institute was an oasis for me. The physical setting alone encouraged the thoughtful atmosphere so essential to academic scholarship, particularly in mathematics. I no longer measured stillness in small portions parceled out throughout the day and mostly night. Instead, I came to savor stillness as part and parcel of my life in Vienna. A certain contemplative spirit returned to me in those months. I wrote professional manuscripts, I found new ideas with ease, and I filled pages of moleskins with personal and professional thoughts. I recaptured the life of the mind until late afternoon and weekends, but that was enough. We spent our weekends exploring the Austrian countryside and relaxing in thermal baths. We discovered we liked expansive pools of warm water with therapeutic bubbles. We found truffle torte tea could cure just about any malady. Without a car, going anywhere, the grocery, the library, or the pharmacy quickly escalated to the status of an adventure. All the while, of course, I gave considerable thought to my children and their Vienna experiences. Had this foray into the unknown asked too much of them? Shortly before we returned to the States, my daughter assuaged my concerns with one of those conversations you never plan and never forget. As Hannah and I cast our gaze out her bedroom window one night, she made a query I will always remember. "Do you think you've helped women gain respect in mathematics?" she asked quietly, as easily as she would have asked if we could put milk on the grocery list. "I'm not sure if I've done that," I replied, "but I hope I've shown people you can be a thoughtful, attentive parent and a successful college professor at the same time." "Of course you've done that," Hannah assured me. There it was, a spontaneous evaluation I had not asked for, an evaluation that did not require 7 binders of material to document and 15 letters to support, an evaluation far more critical than the one that had made this windowsill conversation possible in the first place. In that single moment, the precarious balance I had carefully pursued for more than a decade overwhelmingly fell in my favor. Now, back in the classroom, in and among the mathematics, I continue to emphasize pursuing what you love and listening to the silent inner voice that speaks to you in the more still moments of life. Only now, although I don't mention it to my students, I know that voice can whisper to you on windowsills in foreign countries when you least expect it.
I feel a little bad following Della. I don't have nearly as much good chocolate in my story. This essay is called I Am Not a Head on a Stick, on being a teacher and a doctor and a mommy. I walked into the history professor's office with my 2.5-year-old on my hip and the signature page in my hand. My dissertation was done. The history professor was the last to sign off. I'd first met this professor 3 years earlier when I was 6 months pregnant and about to take my orals. My director had recommended her for the 5th person on the exam committee, so I'd given her a prospectus to read, but I'm not sure we'd really met before the exam itself. I had, however, had a dream about her. In it, my qualifying exam had turned improbably into a garden party. We all wore floral dresses and hats. My director was grilling me over the cucumber sandwiches, and the history professor came to my defense. I awoke from the dream bemused by the images, the hats, the dresses, and looking forward to meeting my imagined savior. The actual exam didn't go quite like that, but she had been pleasant. My committee was 4 women and 1 man, and everyone in the room was a parent except my female director. They gave me a break halfway through the exam in deference to my delicate condition. They asked tough questions, but I passed, and then I went on dissertation fellowship. About 6 weeks later, I had my appendix out, not a surgery one looks for, 7 months pregnant, but my daughter was born uneventfully right after Christmas. I'd been surprised when the history professor volunteered to be my outside reader, since I'd never met her before my orals. I don't recall running chapters by her along the way, though it's possible I did. I wrote the first one through my daughter's colic, the others in whatever time I could afford to pay a sitter. After that first year dissertation fellowship, so I had the year off from teaching and a reasonable stipend, after that first year, the best maternity leave in the state, a fellow graduate student called it, I had gone back to trying to write through my teaching assistantship around the baby's nap time, sending chapters to a director who had taken a job across the country. Frankly, those 3 years are a blur. Photos prove that we held birthday parties for our daughter, enrolled her in preschool, occasionally had dinner with friends, but it's hard to remember many details other than an overwhelming sense of never, not once, being quite ready for anything. And now here I was in the history professor's office. I was a bit flustered. It felt unprofessional to bring my daughter with me to gather this last signature, but we'd had a babysitting breakdown, so I was on my own with my daughter for the day. As usual, I'd forgotten to bring along any toys, crayons, paper, any of the useful entertainment that some mothers seem naturally to carry with them everywhere. Once we'd passed the toilet training milestone and ditched the diaper bag, I traveled light, often too light. Knowing I had a pretty limited window of good behavior, then I thrust the paper toward the history professor for her signature. But she looked straight at my daughter. "Do you know what your mommy's doing today?" she asked. My daughter shook her head. "Your mommy's doing something very important," she said. "She's finishing a big piece of work. You should be very proud of her. She's a doctor now." She made sure my daughter heard her, looking into her blue eyes and ignoring the paper I still held awkwardly before her. Finally, when she knew she'd gotten through, she signed my page and congratulated me. As we left the office, though, Mariah objected to my professor's words. "You're not a doctor, you're a mommy." So I reminded her that I was, after all, already a teacher and that people could be more than one thing. For months afterwards, when my husband and I talked to her about what she might want to be when she grew up, she'd answer, "A teacher and a doctor and a mommy," that being the formulation that made sense to her. I think that may be the best moment I've ever had in trying to balance academe and family, baby on my hip, signature page in my hand. Friends of mine without kids thought balancing school and family would be easy. "Can't you just put the baby in the snuggly while you teach?" No. Books and babies stopped mixing for me just about the time of my oral exams, in fact. My daughter, still in utero, used to quite literally kick books off my belly when I'd rest them there to read. My husband and I joked that she knew they were competition. Maybe it wasn't a joke. I've often wondered why it was the history professor who was able to make that connection to my daughter, to engage her at that moment and make me feel as if the two halves of my life really did come together. Maybe it's because of the field she's in. Historians, after all, know the importance of bodies in the world. While literature professors can often lose themselves in the abstractions of language, and at many times during my life as a parent, that's been an appealing possibility, historians always know there's something outside the text, even if it's a shadowy figure best represented by yet another text. By bringing my daughter with me that day, I made my own body visible, my own life a tenuously unified whole. There she was, unignorable evidence that I'd had other things than my dissertation on my mind for the past 3 years. For whatever reason, this historian made a connection that I've spent much of the rest of my career trying to get back to. Amy Hudock notes in her essay for this anthology that academics who are also mothers are required to perform childlessness on the job. And that's something I've never been willing or indeed able to do. When I announced my second pregnancy to one colleague in my department, he blanched visibly, doing all he could to keep from staring at my already prominent belly. Then he told me the story, I'm sure this was totally disconnected from what I just told him. He told me the story of a female colleague who'd hidden 2 pregnancies, timing them, so each child was born during the summer, returning to work with a 2-hour commute the following fall. No one had ever known she was pregnant. They referred to it as the Immaculate Conception both times, he told me. Maybe he didn't mean it to be, but the story felt like a rebuke. Why hadn't I planned better? Figured out a way that he wouldn't have to deal with me and my baby? We joked, my husband and I, that what he really wanted in the classroom was a head on a stick, a bodiless intellectual who could simply perform as required in the classroom. I couldn't do it. My child would be born late enough in the summer that I'd need some maternity leave before returning to work. The university complied with, indeed surpassed, the Family and Medical Leave Act by offering 6 weeks with pay. Family and Medical Leave Act only requires 6 weeks without pay. And I should say that we now have a semester leave, so I'm delighted that that's changed. But this meant 11 years ago, almost 12, that I would be returning to work 3 weeks into the semester, brain dead and sleep deprived. I remember little from that fall. It's a recurring motif, right? Other than the constant fear that I'd forget to lock my office door while pumping. I'm pretty sure my student evaluations tanked. In addition to newborn, after all, we had a 7-year-old at home who was making the transition to older siblinghood, I'm sorry to say this, with little grace and serious sleep problems. While my second-born was a relatively easy baby, no amount of ease compensates for disrupted sleep and the pure physical exhaustion of new motherhood and the early days of nursing. It wasn't easy. We often wondered if we should have done it differently, chosen different fields, found my husband a different job before I got pregnant, prepared our daughter better. In the end, though, I wanted my job to accommodate me, to recognize that I was an asset, even with, indeed, especially with 2 children. As a mother, I've finished a dissertation, found an academic job, written articles, co-edited an academic journal. Like many of my colleagues, I've also chaired committees, written reports, served on endless boards, committees, commissions, subcommittees, and the like. I've taught, at the time I wrote this, roughly 1,000 students. I imagine that's gone up. And along the way, I've earned tenure. In addition to the baseline requirements of my position, however, I've added 2 subspecialties to my teaching that arose directly out of parenting: children's literature and creative nonfiction writing, a genre I rediscovered in Anne Lamott's operating instructions. I've combined my academic work with community service and involved my students in service learning as volunteers at local elementary schools, starting with the one where my daughter was enrolled. I've written in my specialty of children's literature for a non-academic audience, and I've mentored students, many of whom have seen me either pregnant or met my children, and who want to know how they too can have it all. While I might have done some of those things without children, I couldn't have done the rest. And wouldn't that have been a loss to the profession, to the institution? For the university to matter in this day of outcome-based education and ever-heightened expectations for career preparation, we have to be able to speak to those outside our discipline, demonstrate our value to the community at large, and provide a model for our students, both those who will become academics and the far greater number who won't. So how do we do it? How do we maintain balance, change the world, raise our children, and do our jobs? Yeah, no, I don't have an answer. Sorry. Couldn't resist. Flexible work, on-site childcare, and the like, those would be a start. But even more than that, I want us to refuse to perform childlessness, to make visible the strains and the costs of our striving for balance, as we also insist on the centrality of our families to our work. For me, in some ways, that's not always terribly hard. As a children's literature specialist, even though that wasn't my graduate training, my status as a parent is a plus. I can and do bring in experts, my own children, to my classes, refer to their reading, demonstrate to my students the ways in which at least 2 real children respond to the books my students are struggling with. It's far more acceptable for me, a woman who specializes in children's literature, a traditionally female ghetto, to make these kinds of claims than for men in the hard sciences, gay parents, single mothers, a whole variety of others. No one would really admit to expecting me to perform childlessness, in other words, though they might prefer it if I would. It would make their lives easier. But I've refused to schedule meetings late in the day because I needed to do after-school pickup. Not every university or every department could accommodate even that. My children are now, got to add again, 19 and 11. They can't remember a time when I wasn't a teacher and a doctor and a mommy. And though they at times resent all 3 roles, this is the life they know. It's the life I know too, and while I want to change it almost daily, I don't want to give it up. I want to fight, though, to have it acknowledged for what it is, a whole life, a life of both the mind and the body, so that no one expects them or anybody else to be a head on a stick.
I also want to thank Libby for inviting me to come today from Maryland, and also Caroline, who accepted my essay in the first place. It wasn't until I became a part of this anthology and was connected with the really rich community of women that I have met participating in these readings, but also online, that I realized how alone I actually was as an academic mom. So thanks to both of you. My essay is called Lip Service. When I'm at dinner or out for drinks with my colleagues, I sometimes joke that my daughter has been orphaned by my profession. It's a line I picked up from one of my students, a young man named Toby, a student who has the odd distinction of having taken me for 7 separate courses, who was, at the time when I wrote this, the son of my department chair, and who, like me, is the product of 2 academic parents. Once, when Toby and I met to discuss his senior project, we got distracted and started talking about what it was like to grow up in a house full of PhDs, about playing grading with our siblings, about learning to drink coffee with lots and lots of sugar and fake cream, all that was available at our parents' offices, and about whooping and skulking through the halls of various college buildings, waiting for mom or dad to finish up with a student. Does this sound familiar, Kate? At some point, Toby said, "Yeah, I was orphaned by the profession, man. I raised myself." And though he continued teasing about how he carefully learned to avoid using lay, lie, laid, or lane in any sentence, another thing that we have in common, both of our parents are English professors, I was too struck with what he had just said to hear much else. Without meaning to, Toby had just laid, he would have said put, of course, his finger on my own heart's bruising. This tender belief that my own commitment to the profession has forsaken my daughter. Yet to say that my daughter Catherine has been orphaned by my profession is, frankly, a line out of a pull on the heartstrings Hollywood tragedy, a line that takes the responsibility off my own shoulders and blames instead my line of work. If I am honest in the telling, I must say that my daughter has been orphaned by me, by my own choices. Ask me what the most important thing in my life is, and I'll tell you that it's Catherine. Every night when I kiss her, even if she's already asleep when I get home, I rub my nose in her hair, smell her weedy, warm, little girl smell, and whisper that I love her more than anything. It is my ritual. But take an inventory of my days, my weeks, get inside my head and see how I'm consumed with what needs to happen next, with the papers I need to grade, the novel I need to read, the manuscript I need to edit, the colleague I need to have lunch with. And it's clear that the most important thing in my life is an ongoing mental tally. My work, work. It's clear that putting my family before my work is just lip service. Lip service I pay to a version of myself that I project to others. And this version of myself is one that I cherish as any reader and writer of fiction cherishes one of her favorite characters. Lip service, it's an odd phrase. A service is simultaneously a ceremony, an examination, a good turn. Funeral service, escort service, full service gas station, to be of service. As a verb, service is synonymous with examine, tune, check, overhaul, and repair, although the Latin suggests a harsher and more candid origin. Servitum, from service or slave, the condition of serving, of being a servant. Lip service, then, is the service of lips. The lips wait on, work for, or serve up something for their own owner or for others. This saying, then, perhaps suggests more than just words that cross the mouth but duck the heart. Perhaps lip service might mean something more than a false sentiment, a politician's pledge, a mother's wish. In an English department of 13, I'm the only female faculty member with a child, and I need to add to this, actually 3 weeks ago, a colleague of mine gave birth to another child, so I'm no longer alone. In the Arts and Letters division encompassing 5 distinct disciplines, I am one of only 5 women with children. And while my college, small, public, liberal arts, has hired more women in recent years for tenure-track appointments, a significant number of those women don't have children, don't want children, and some wish to remain single. Moreover, although my college is fastened to a shoreline in southern Maryland and thus is both very beautiful and very remote, it offers no campus childcare. There is an explicit policy that states faculty are not supposed to hire students to take care of their children on campus grounds for liability. We all do. Faculty and department meetings are routinely held over the dinner hour. They're scheduled from 4 to 6 in the evening. And the maternity leave is negotiated always on a case-by-case basis. The assumption then here is clear. A faculty member has someone at home to take care of any dependents. Yet nationally speaking, and without data for same-sex couples, there are still only about 1 million stay-home dads in the United States, which means, of course, that my college is also assuming something else, that faculty are men with wives at home to rear their kids. A few springs ago now, when I was writing this, at a teaching and learning lunch I attended on living a more committed life, I was told by no less than 3 senior faculty members to just say yes. Just say yes when asked to chair a committee, organize a reading, write a letter of recommendation, participate in a student-run conference. Just say yes. To attending music and theater and sports events, just say yes. To mentoring yet another one-on-one year-long senior project, to being yet another club advisor, to writing yet another article for a campus publication. In other words, just say yes to forever blurring the boundaries between work and family, work and self. But saying yes in this context smacks of giving mere lip service to living a committed campus life. It is to be a yes woman. To be a yes woman is to wear a coat of many colored caricatures, cool teacher, smart scholar, all-around good gal. A committed life would be, in my definition, a life lived ever aware that we are food for worms, that what we humans have in common is that vacant skull, those eyes starved wide, all that will remain of us after death. Over the past 9 years, I have been a yes woman of the worst kind. This is going to sound a bit like what Libby was talking about. In the same month, I had a positive pregnancy test. I began the 2nd chapter of my dissertation. Thereafter, as my belly grew and my fingers moved further and further away from the keyboard, as my internal due date forced me to defend my thesis earlier than I had intended, Catherine took a back seat to my work. I didn't sleep as much or exercise or eat as well as I should have. Even on the day that I gave birth, and this is true, I cranked out just under 40 job applications before driving to the hospital. And I gave up breastfeeding too early so that I could attend the Modern Language Association conference, which is the conference in our discipline that you have to go to get a job, without having to pump between my job interviews. From the first, people marveled. They called me a supermom. I'd finished a dissertation on Victorian women writers in just 9 months. I'd successfully defended that dissertation exactly 2 weeks before I gave birth. I went on the job market, applying ultimately for 88 academic positions in the first 2 months of Catherine's life. I did 6 on-campus interviews before Catherine was 6 months old, and I landed a tenure-track job in English at a very good liberal arts college. Since then, I've co-authored a textbook, co-authored a collection of letters, published my dissertation as a monograph, placed 6 short stories, 2 articles, and 4 encyclopedia entries, taught 9 new courses, taken students to England twice, won 2 teaching awards, received a junior faculty research award, obtained 4 additional grants to support my work, chaired a college-wide committee, hosted 7 visiting writers, presented 10 talks and conference papers, and have been given the Student Life Award for committed teaching and supportive mentorship. As this service record suggests, I've spent these 9 years measuring, tallying myself up. It's not even mathematics, the elegance of numbers over lines or numbers against lines, a numerical stretch toward eternity. My list is just a tally, hash marks, the work of a stick in the dirt or a pen to a napkin, a slim language of pettiness and doubt. And of course, my sum was added up in the expected way. 3 years ago now, I received tenure, and when I wrote this was on my first sabbatical, working on my first novel. But this service record merely constitutes the quality of me on the CV, on the English department webpage, on ratemyprofessor.com. Yes, we do look. The actual me is often a wreck, insecure, driven by fears of rejection and disapproval. I don't need Dr. Phil to tell me that I'm a workaholic, that I suffer from a classic case of the imposter syndrome, that feeling many academic women have of not being quite right, not a true master of their material. The actual me is often a slipshod parent, a partial partner, an inconsistent friend, or an absent family member. In the same years that I made all those lines on my CV, I also missed being there in the room for Catherine's first word, being there when she took her first step, being there when she had a temperature of 104 degrees and had to go to the hospital. Most days I haven't helped Catherine with her homework, haven't picked her up from school, and most days I also haven't bathed her, brushed her teeth, or put her to bed. Instead, my spouse, initially a stay-at-home dissertating dad, and now an administrator and teacher at my college, has borne the brunt of raising our child, of enabling my workaholic mania. Catherine's nickname for her father is my daddy. Indeed, I've slowly disconnected from my spouse. After 17 years of marriage, we have almost entirely separate lives now, lives driven and dictated by this demanding schedule that I myself have created. At that teaching and learning lunch those 3 springs ago, after we'd all been encouraged to become yes folk, a young colleague of mine from education called at me across the room. Jennifer, I want to hear from Jennifer. She's a mom, she's a great teacher, she's successful, she's published all those books. How do you do it? How? I want to know your secret. It was a terrible moment. Without meaning to, this woman, a brand new mother herself, asked me to strike solace from rock, from my own heart's waste. Tears cornered my eyes. How could I explain the dry ticks that marked my career, marked the time spent away from my daughter? I said, "Oh, Angela, when I'm at work, I feel guilty about not being with Kate. When I'm with Kate, I worry about the work I'm not getting done. I have nothing to offer you, no wisdom at all." A few heads nodded. Most faces turned away. They'd glimpsed the honest bone, the shape of my skull. The leader of the session said, "Oh, thank you for your honesty, Jennifer." And the conversation moved to a lack of daycare options on or around campus, moved away from this moment when I might have serviced my lips to tell more truths. for I'd like to put my lips to real service. I'd like to repair some of the damage I've done with my mouth's raw wound. That there is a part of me that doesn't know who she will be if she's not praised as being a super mom, a super teacher, a super writer, a super colleague, a super woman. That I don't always know how to be around Catherine. I'm not easy with children. It's not innate. That I take my spouse for granted, have built my career on his patient broad back. That I don't want to have another child because I'm too selfish. I want to write this novel I'm working on. I want to travel the world wide. I want to sleep through the night for the rest of my nights. That I fear the frost thickness of my own heart, how cold sometimes I can be to others and their private pain. And that I want to make Catherine the most important thing in my life. I want it as I crave sky's color at twilight, as I need to believe in love and in souls, but that I don't know how. I don't have the slightest idea how to live each day with Catherine at its center. And so I end with this beginning. I use my lips to ask a question. Is a child deprived if she is raised primarily by her father? Or is it the mother who deprives herself by choosing service over lips? For it is my lips that serve my heart. And when I don't press them to my daughter's head, when I don't make enough time to do that enough, I have only the memory of having done so, a mental record of previous miracles. I must have faith in my love for Catherine, in her love for me, a love that is both transcendent and everyday beauty. My memory of that love, my record of it, is whether it exists, whether it will continue to exist. And I service myself, my lips, to keep it in existence, to keep it alive, living, present, now.
Difficult to follow you all up. People ask us sometimes how we chose the essays in this book, and I would say it was the ones that made us laugh, and it was the ones that made us cry. And I've read these essays so many times, probably 10 or a dozen times each, and I've heard Jennifer read hers before, but I've never heard Libby and Della read, and they still make me cry. So I'm going to read just a really short bit of mine so that we can get to some discussion. So you're not going to get the whole arc of my career, just a couple little vignettes. It's called The Bags I Carried. "Mama," says Ben as we cuddled in his bed, "tell me a story. Tell me a story about when I was still in your belly." "Well," I answer, shifting his weight more comfortably against my chest as we leaned together against his pillow, "when you were in my belly, I was a teacher. Every day I would drive to a school with long brick pathways and big green lawns. I carried a heavy backpack, bigger than yours, full of papers and books from my office to my classroom and back again. My students and I would talk about books together, and I would help them write essays about what they read. When the class was over, I continued quietly, listening to his breathing slow. I would meet my students one by one. We sat in my office together and talked about their essays, and I would help them write out their ideas as clearly as they could." Says Ben, drifting off to sleep. "And now," he says, finishing the story as I've told it to him dozens of times, "you don't teach those students anymore. You teach me. It's taken me years to be as easy as he is with the change in my student roster." Skip back now. I'm 25 when I begin grad school at UC Berkeley. I'm single, feeling light years away from combining academic and family life, but thinking about it. Since I am a good student, I use this time to research that project. I collect anecdotal evidence. Item, my older sister, now a tenured English professor at a small private university. She married a fellow graduate student midway through coursework and had a daughter midway through dissertation writing. She hates to give me advice. But when I began considering graduate school, she couldn't stop herself from warning me about the bleak prospects for job seekers with PhDs, the difficulty of balancing school and family. I forged ahead anyway. Attending my sister's graduation after my first year at Berkeley, I sit in the auditorium with my blonde niece, now pink-haired niece, on my lap. clapping for each graduate until our hands sting. So then we clap just for the women, then just for the women in science, then just for the women in science holding babies. We cheer and whistle for the two of them, but my heart sinks at seeing the statistics about women in higher education walking across the stage. At the end of the ceremony, my sister walks up the aisle past us and scoops her daughter up out of my arms and into her own. So that's the image I cling to as I continue my studies. My sister's new doctoral hood resting across my niece's shoulders, too. Later, after 2 years of looking, my sister finds a good job and moves her small family cross-country. I never question her too closely about how she handles school and family. I see that she does, but I also see that she waits 7 years to have a second child. I look on and applaud her successes, not wanting to know what toll it takes. Item: a senior professor in my department, the mother of 2 grown children. She tells me a story of the dark ages, as she puts it, when she boarded an elevator 8 months pregnant, only to have her department chair recoil at the sight of her and stammer an excuse to take the stairs. I never witnessed behavior like this, but mostly because I don't see many women, professors or students, trying to bring any aspect of their personal life to school. Item: my advisor, the mother of 2 young children. She earned the job at Berkeley without the obligatory campus interview because she had been too pregnant to fly, a huge concession in a competitive market. She seems like a success story. Now she rushes from seminar saying that her kids will be put out on the curb if she's late for preschool pickup again. Prioritize, she reminds me. Original research gets a person hired, not teaching. Put teaching on the back burner, she insists. But when I wonder about how to apply this thinking to a family, I'm stymied by images of small kids and hot stoves. I don't know any other faculty who will discuss their family life, and so I give up this research. 7 years later, I'm going to skip ahead in the essay now, I'm married and I've earned my PhD. Fireworks explode into a fog bank over San Francisco Bay, making the sky glow in soft shades of pink and blue. I'm used to the baby pastels of fog-muted fireworks here, but this year they have a special resonance for me. Pale pink or baby blue, I wonder. I lean back into my husband's arms, surrounded by friends at this rooftop party, happy to share one of my 2 bits of news. Yesterday, I announce, Stanford called me in to interview for a teaching position, and this morning, my pregnancy test read positive. I spend August lying on the couch, queasy and enervated, relieved that I'm no longer on Berkeley's earlier schedule. I tell my department chair about my pregnancy after I am hired, and she, a childless woman in her late 50s, is delighted. I wonder briefly if she ever wanted children. At the first faculty meeting, she asks us all to introduce ourselves by sharing something personal that has nothing to do with teaching. I ponder the question as others mention their hobbies: romance novelist, marathon runner, gourmet cook. When it's my turn, my new boss blurts out, "Caroline's pregnant," before I can say a word. And so my identity here is fixed. Caroline Grant, mother-to-be. During the break in the meeting, I field questions about morning sickness and gender preferences. No one asked me anything about my teaching or research interests. As my first quarter winds down, I reflect on my experience teaching here as a pregnant woman. Item: at a faculty symposium, a colleague taps my growing belly and urges me to read Naomi Wolf's Misconceptions. As I try to back slowly out of her reach, she continues to touch my stomach and question me about my obstetrician's C-section rate. "Do you have children?" I ask, trying to redirect the conversation. "Oh no," she laughs. "I have a horror of pregnancy." Later, in the privacy of my office, I rub my belly, crooning to the baby, apologizing for the assault. Item: the winter quarter schedule is published, and my chair notices that my 3-hour seminars will be held in one of the trailers. They're unheated, and they don't have bathrooms. "Is that going to be an issue for you?" she asks kindly. It's a hassle to petition for a classroom change, but she initiates the paperwork and sees it through for me. Item: a colleague engages me in conversation about accommodating the needs of the job to the needs of the family. "The first year or so is intense," she warns. "The little ones need you so much, but as they grow, you'll develop a good routine with them and find ways to get your work done, even while they're around." Finally, I think, a role model. I start to pepper her with questions about flexible teaching schedules, sleep deprivation, daycare options. Well, she says, I didn't need daycare for my dogs, of course. When I attended conferences, I just put them in a kennel. A kennel. So much for my role model. And I'll end it with that. Thank you.